Thank you to my patrons. Your generosity and commitment to my work is astonishing. I sincerely appreciate it. We've been saved! From what? Rational thought? Again, good for a chuckle, but I'm going to tell you right now, dear listener, and this is where you might be surprised, I have to disagree with this one. I have to disagree. I have to admit that in the past, I've definitely deployed the word irrational. And I've deployed it in very specific circumstances. But this allegation that Christians more generally are irrational, I don't think it's the fairest claim to make.
Take the risk of thinking for yourself. Much more happiness, truth, beauty, and wisdom will come to you that way. Thank you.
Hey everybody, Magic Skeptic here, and don't worry, the video is about to begin. I just wanted to take a moment to make you aware of my Patreon, the link for which can be found in the description below. Sign up today for as little as £3 per month and you can gain access to a plethora of perks and extras, including downloadable audio-only and ad-free versions of my podcast that you can listen to on the go. You can also have your question answered in a monthly video, and better still, depending on which tier you choose, you could even sit down for a Skype call with yours truly, Magic Skeptic. All that is available and much, much more. All you got to do is click the link in the description below. I hope to see you there. Hey everybody, Magic Skeptic here, and you're all very welcome to another episode of A Magician's Thoughts. Up for today is another meme video. If you don't know, I made one of these in the past and you should absolutely check that out before you watch this one. I will include the link in the description below. In that first video, I took a look at creationist or Christian memes that were making fun of atheists and atheism, and I had such a great time making that video, and you guys seem to enjoy it as well, that I thought, well, why not? Let's make another one. But this video is different. In this video, I'm flipping the script, because today we're going to take a look at some atheist memes, and by that I mean the kind of memes that make fun of Christianity and theism more generally. But that said, and be ready for this, folks, just because these memes are of an atheist variety does not mean that your friendly Magic Skeptic agrees with all of them. So sit tight in this video because you might be surprised, perhaps shocked, to discover that I actually disagree with a number of these memes despite their atheistic content. So with that said, we're not going to delay any further. Let's dive right in and take a look at our first meme. Virgins don't have babies. Reality. I have to say, I absolutely love this meme. This is a great one. I agree with this one. Don't worry, dear listener. I'm sure your heartbeat paused for a moment there. Don't worry. I haven't become a believer in the virgin birth. Now, of course, somebody could be pedantic here and say, oh, well, virgins can have babies now because we have things like in vitro fertilization, right? Fair enough. It's possible, theoretically, to be a virgin in today's world and give birth to a child. I grant that easily. The question is, was that possible 2,000 years ago? And I guess if you really wanted to be crude, it's possible to take a seed and put it where fertilization could potentially occur without the need for intercourse. That's possible, I guess. But that's not the claim that Christianity makes, is it? Christians don't believe that the seed of God was inserted into the Virgin Mary using some kind of a tube, right? They don't believe that. They think that God made a virgin pregnant using some kind of supernatural force or power. So yeah, the idea that virgins can give birth through some kind of supernatural process is obviously hogwash. It's obviously nonsense. And I must admit, my favorite response to this, I think originally goes to Hume. I think it was Hume who said it, but Christopher Hitchens is undoubtedly responsible for popularizing the statement in our time. And what Christopher Hitchens said on stage, quoting Hume, was the following.
I think it was David Hume who put it slightly vulgarly. This was again about the virgin birth, I think. Which is more likely, that the whole natural order is suspended, or that a Jewish minx should tell a lie? There has to be an answer to this kind of question.
And I have to say, I love that reasoning. And I think that reasoning is spot on, really. And again, this goes back to Hume. Hume said and invited us as people to think about the following dichotomy. What's more likely, that a miracle has occurred or that you're mistaken? Now, I'm not saying that this is a knockdown argument against all theistic claims or anything like that, but I do think it's a very helpful question. And I think the answer to the question is pretty damn obvious. It's more likely that you're mistaken. Whenever you put a supernatural explanation alongside a naturalistic one, and perhaps this is just my methodological naturalism speaking, but I do think it's intrinsically far more likely that the naturalistic explanation is the true one. Why? Because we have very good evidence of the natural, and we don't have any good evidence for the supernatural. We're talking about God impregnating a virgin woman from heaven via some kind of supernatural, miraculous force. We have exactly 0 confirmed examples. Meanwhile, we have billions upon billions upon billions upon billions of examples of natural conceptions. So when I say that it's intrinsically far more likely that a naturalistic explanation obtains as opposed to a supernatural one, that's what I'm referring to. Not only do we have 0 confirmed examples, we have 0 confirmed examples of any supernatural event. Not one. Bupkis. We've got a whole pile of assertions and dodgy claims and fallacious propositions, but we have 0 confirmed examples of anything supernatural happening ever. And before anybody jumps into the comments, an unexplained event is not evidence of the supernatural. An unexplained event is evidence for nothing. Unexplained events require more investigation. Sometimes we have to hold our hands up and say, I don't know. I don't know is not evidence for the supernatural unless you want to start playing the God of the Gaps game, which is fallacious in the extreme. We have 0 confirmed examples of the supernatural. And furthermore, nobody has even identified a mechanism for proving the supernatural, for identifying supernatural causation. How would you even go about demonstrating that? How would you go about detecting the supernatural? This is why I would stand steadfastly by the claim that naturalistic explanations are intrinsically far more likely. Now, that doesn't mean before any of the theists in the audience jump on me and say, see, you're closed down, you're unreasonable, you're irrational, you're committed to materialism or naturalism, and you're never going to accept a supernatural explanation. That's not actually the case at all. I'll accept a supernatural explanation just as soon as somebody provides evidence for one. I had a comment recently where somebody said, oh, but if there was evidence for it, it wouldn't be supernatural. Well, if that's the case, we're stuck, and there's not a whole pile we can do about it. If what you're saying is the only way a person can believe in the supernatural is to believe in it in the complete absence of evidence, well then believing in the supernatural is definitionally irrational. No reasonable person should believe in something unless there's good supporting evidence for it. It's that simple. And if you disagree with that, dear listener, you're not a skeptic. If you disagree with that, you're not an empiricist. And I would go so far as to venture, if you disagree with that, you're probably a moron. So, what's more likely? That a virgin birth occurred? Or that a Jewish minx told a lie? Or that a story got passed down through the generations and changed over time? Right? That's entirely possible as well. There are other naturalistic explanations, right? Not just that Mary told a lie, but that the story just changed over time. I've actually read, and please understand, dear listener, I'm not entirely certain as to the veracity of this particular claim, so fact check me on this, please. But if this is true, this is fascinating. I read that the word virgin, as it is deployed in the Christian scriptures, might actually be a mistranslation for the word young. So perhaps the original claim was that a young woman gave birth to a healthy baby boy, not that a virgin woman gave birth to a healthy baby boy. If any of you out there are biblical scholars or you have any expertise in this area, please jump into the comments below and let me know. Remember, I'm not standing hard and fast by that claim. I'm just saying that if that's true, it's utterly fascinating, and it bears mentioning here that I would argue, at the very least, that that's more likely than the idea that a virgin gave birth to a baby because God impregnated her from heaven. So anyway, I think I've spent a pretty long time on this one meme, so let's move on to the next one and see what we've got. The Old Testament doesn't apply. Unless, of course, we say it applies, then the part we say applies does apply. But the bad stuff you mentioned doesn't apply because of Jesus. Oh, man. You gotta love the theological get-out-of-jail-free cards. If you're an atheist, and if, like me, you have conversations about this topic with other people, you will inevitably bump into this talking point from Christians. It is absolutely laughable, and it's utterly crap and so easy to refute. So if you don't know how to refute it, dear listener, have a listen. So this idea that the Old Testament doesn't apply, Christians will deploy this, it seems to me, or at least in my anecdotal experience, they will deploy this to try and escape some of the nastier sides of the Bible. So the passages about slavery, for example, many of those are found in the Old Testament. And to try and escape that, Christians will say something like, well, we don't follow the Old Testament. We follow the new and everlasting covenant. We follow the New Testament. Jesus Christ is our guide. That's what we follow. This is cherry picking at best. Why? Because they do follow the Old Testament. And here's your response. Oh, so you're telling me God didn't create the earth then? Oh, no, he did. Yeah, but how do you know that? Oh, well, there's the 6 days of creation. God rests on the seventh. Yeah, that's in the book of Genesis. In the Old Testament. Are you telling me you don't follow the Ten Commandments? Oh, yeah, we do. Yeah, we follow the Ten Commandments. Yeah, they are the Old Testament, buddy. Right? They're in the Old Testament. So you don't get to say we don't follow the Old Testament if you're a Christian, unless you want to abandon your creation myth, unless you want to abandon Adam and Eve, unless you want to abandon your 10 commandments and a whole load of other stuff. You don't get to say we don't follow the Old Testament. That's bullshit. That is absolute nonsense. But again, they will deploy this to try and escape the nastier sides of the Bible. Now, some Christians will actually just own the nastier stuff because they're actually quite nasty people. I'm thinking of people like the Westboro Baptist Church and so forth. I mean, they just take it all, hook, line, and sinker. So I suppose in some meaningful sense, I should be grateful for the Christians who want to abandon the nastier sides of the Bible. But I do still think, at the same time, it's important to draw attention to the fact that when they do so, while their moral compass, which is on display when they do that, is clearly in the right place, it's still important to point out that when they abandon the Old Testament, they're also engaged in cherry picking, because they're not going to abandon all of it. And if they're cherry picking, unless they can establish an objective mechanism for choosing what to keep and what to abandon, well, then it just sheds a very negative light on the whole thing. If you're cherry picking and doing it on the basis of pure preference or cultural circumstance, well, then why are you following any of this? Why are you taking the Bible seriously on any question? And so, yeah, I do think it's important to hold Christians' feet to the fire on this one, because it's just garbage. You can't cherry pick. And if you do, you have to establish an objective mechanism. And nobody has ever done that. It seems to me that what Christians actually do is avoid the stuff that's inconvenient and keep the stuff that they like. That doesn't sound very scientific to me. That doesn't sound very intellectually robust to me. And by the way, not even Jesus agrees with them, because Jesus says in the New Testament that not a jot or tittle of the old law should be forgotten. Right? So not even Jesus agrees with the Christians who say we don't follow the Old Testament. That's another debate for another time, but I just thought it was worth mentioning here. But the Christians who do embrace the Old Testament and say that they follow all of it, they're just as bad, because they don't follow it all either. In fact, I had a debate with a Christian just recently who was justifying their homophobia according to the statements of the Old Testament. Simultaneously, they're wearing mixed fabrics, and I brought that to their attention. I was like, oh, but I see you're wearing mixed fabrics. And they said, what? What? Who cares if I'm wearing mixed fabrics? Ah, I see. So you're not familiar with this other rule that's in the Old Testament, are you? The one that forbids the wearing of mixed fabrics. But you are aware of the prohibition on homosexuality. You are aware of the claims which suggest that it's sinful to be gay or to act on it, more specifically. I love how you're aware of that, but not of the other rule that you're currently breaking. So unless you're going to be consistent and follow all of it, I don't want to hear any of your bogus crap about how homosexuality is an abomination. That's garbage. You don't get to follow one rule and not the other and maintain that you're being consistent. All Christians cherry pick, those who follow the Old Testament, those who follow the New, and those who follow both. And while this meme is a very, very simple one, I think it does an excellent job of drawing attention to that fact. But with that acknowledged, let's move on to our next meme. Please tell me more about how God gave you free will, but everything happens according to his plan. This is definitely one of my favorite memes because it draws attention to something that, to be honest, I don't see debated a whole pile. Christianity presupposes free will. It says that we are free to choose between right and wrong, and that we are free to enter into a loving relationship with Jesus Christ, and that if we choose not to, we'll go to hell, yada, yada, yada. It presupposes libertarian free will. Now, I've made videos on free will or the lack thereof in the past, and if you're interested in checking out my views, guys, you can go and watch those videos. I won't go into that here because, quite frankly, my video on free will and determinism and compatibilism is over an hour long, so I couldn't possibly get into it in depth here. Suffice to say, I'm a determinist. I don't believe there's any free will, so I think Christianity is wrong right off the bat when it assumes or presupposes libertarian free will. But I would argue that there can't even be free will if we assume that Christianity is true. And it's because of theological determinism. What am I speaking about? Well, as this meme is drawing attention to, God foresees the entire future. Nothing happens outside of God's plan. God knows exactly what I'm going to do, when I'm going to do it, down to the nanosecond, right? Now, here's the question. If God is all-knowing, and he knows what I'm going to do in the future, can I do otherwise? And the answer to that is no. It's not possible to do anything outside of what God has foreseen. Because if you did do something outside of what God has foreseen, you would have surprised God. And you can't surprise an all-knowing being. What God knows you're going to do in the future must come to pass, which means you cannot do otherwise. Now, some people misunderstand this problem and they say, oh, God simply foresees your free decision. But what you've just uttered there is a paradox, and an example will help. Whatever I have for breakfast tomorrow morning, God knows what it's going to be, right? Of course he does. God is all-knowing. There's no way God couldn't know that information. So let's imagine when it comes to tomorrow morning, I have a little mental deliberation, which will feel free to my mind at the time. I grant that easily. But let's imagine I'm deliberating between whether I'm going to have toast or cereal, okay? Toast or cereal, and that's the decision. And I'm thinking over and back, do I want toast? Do I want cereal? Let me have a think here. And I'm reflecting and I'm thinking about it and so on and so forth. Let's imagine for this particular case, God has foreseen that I'm going to have toast. God has foreseen that. If you had asked God this question 6 billion years ago, what is Magic Skeptic going to have for breakfast tomorrow morning? God will say toast, because God's knowledge is infinite, he is all-knowing, and he's going to know what Magic Skeptic is going to have for breakfast tomorrow morning. He knows I'm going to have toast. So, if that's the case, dear listener, can you not see that it doesn't matter how long I deliberate between toast and cereal? I'm always and inevitably going to choose toast. I have to. Because God is all-knowing, which means he cannot be wrong. What God has foreseen must come to pass. Now, if you respond to this and you say, oh, no, you can have cereal. You can. Of course you can. Well, then you're suggesting that God could be wrong. Now, some people engage in a bit of sophistry here and they say, no, but if you chose cereal, that's what God would have foreseen. Yes, I get that, but that's not free will. Again, I will repeat, God has foreseen billions of years in advance that I'm going to have toast. So in this specific case, God has foreseen toast. So in this specific case, where God has foreseen toast, my question is this: can I possibly have cereal? Now, you cannot pivot to, oh yeah, you can, but God would have foreseen. No. Sorry. God has foreseen in this case that I'm going to have toast. So given the fact that God has foreseen that, is it possible, is it metaphysically possible for me to choose cereal, given the fact that in this specific case, God has foreseen toast? If you are being honest about the nature of omniscience, and the fact that God cannot be wrong and that God could not possibly be surprised, the only honest answer here is that it is inevitable that I'm going to choose, in inverted commas, toast. I cannot possibly do anything outside of what God has foreseen. All that said, before I bring this particular point to a close, I think it would be remiss of me not to mention one potential theological solution to this problem that theologians have come up with. They point out that God exists outside of time. So God doesn't exactly have foreknowledge of our actions, and so God cannot be seen as a theological determining factor in what we ultimately do. God views time from outside of it. God sees the past, present, and future simultaneously, and so it is a foolish mistake to posit that God has foreknowledge, which is absolute, and that as a consequence, things must come to pass in a manner that is consistent with his foreknowledge. What they're saying, of course, is that there just isn't foreknowledge because God is seeing the past, present, and future simultaneously. This doesn't appear to solve the problem, if you ask me, and it's because it doesn't matter where God is, or when God is, or if God is outside of space and time, whatever the hell that means. That's another idea for another video that would require an immense amount of unpacking, the very concept of which sounds incredibly incoherent to me. How can you be outside of space and time? If God is outside of space and time, then God can't be occupying a particular space at a particular time. So God is nowhere. God doesn't exist if God is outside of space and time, it seems to me. But I am but a mere mortal, dear listener. Forgive me for not being able to grasp that rather heady, nonsensical concept, but I digress. I don't care if God is inside, outside. I don't care where God is in relation to time, in the past, present, future, outside. It's irrelevant. So long as God is omniscient, the problem of theological determinism holds. It's God's omniscience that is the problem. It's not that God is in the past looking forward. In my explanation, I point out, in order to explain things, that God would know what I was going to do even 6 billion years before I do it, but that doesn't mean that my argument relies on the fact that God knows this 6 billion years in advance, or longer even. The key point is, God is omniscient. It doesn't matter how far God is in the past, doesn't matter how far God is into the future, doesn't matter if God is outside time, inside time. It is God's omniscience that creates the problem of theological determinism. So I'm not convinced that this little bit of sleight of hand, this assertion about God being outside of space and time, I'm not convinced that that solves the problem of theological determinism. Not just because of my own argument, but because I've heard other theologians acknowledge this problem. So much so that many apologists I meet nowadays don't suggest that this is a solution anymore. In fact, what they opt for instead is the destruction of God's omniscience altogether. Many theologians that I encounter today point out that God doesn't have absolute foreknowledge of your decisions and what you're going to do. And they've been beaten into that position because they understand the truth of the argument that I'm proposing. Theological determinism is a huge problem for Christianity. But if they abandon omniscience, the problem goes away. That's fine. If you abandon omniscience, if you say that God is merely maximally knowing, that God knows a hell of a lot but not everything, well then you can exempt God's foreknowledge of our decisions, and then the problem of theological determinism is abolished. But it does require that you sacrifice one of the classical tri-omni attributes. So just to be clear, so long as God is omniscient, our decisions cannot possibly be free. The problem of theological determinism holds. So if I'm going to have toast, it's not possible for me to do otherwise because God has foreseen it or has seen it from outside space and time. Wherever God is, if God knows with certainty, because he is all-knowing, that I'm going to have toast, then that must come to pass. Quite a sophisticated point for a very simple meme to draw attention to. But yes, I do agree with the meme. I think there is a tension between the Christian belief that we have free will and the Christian belief, not a belief that all Christians hold, by the way, but the belief that's held by many Christians that God is all-knowing and henceforth his knowledge of the future is absolute and not subject to error. But with that acknowledged, let's move on to our next meme. We've been saved! From what? Rational thought? Again, good for a chuckle, but I'm going to tell you right now, dear listener, and this is where you might be surprised, I have to disagree with this one. I have to disagree. I have to admit that in the past, I've definitely deployed the word irrational, and I've deployed it in very specific circumstances. But this allegation that Christians more generally are irrational, I don't think it's the fairest claim to make. I don't think it's reasonable. But it depends on your definition. For me, irrationality is not synonymous with being wrong. And I think that that's what this meme is driving at. It seems to imply that these people are all so wrong, they're all so incorrect in their religious presuppositions and beliefs that they are irrational. But that's not how I define irrational. In fact, I would say that it's entirely possible to be incorrect and wrong and still be labeled as rational. An analogy will help. Let's imagine that somebody frames your friendly Magic Skeptic for a murder. So they take my fingerprints and they plant them at the scene of the crime. They take the DNA of the poor victim and they plant it at my home, which is not the scene of the crime. And let's imagine they get witnesses to agree to the fact that they saw me enter the premises where the victim met their untimely demise, and so on and so forth. The question is, would it be rational to come to the conclusion in this particular case that Magic Skeptic is a murderer? And I think, if you're being honest, it would be perfectly reasonable for the jury in that case to conclude that I am a murderer. And they would be perfectly rational in forming that conclusion. Because the evidence, manipulative though it is, because the evidence is convincing. They are just doing what any rational human does, follows the evidence where it leads. It just so happens that in this case, the evidence is misleading, and it's because I've been framed. So they are simultaneously rational and incorrect. Now, dear listener, I know I can sense it. A lot of my atheist skeptic friends in the audience are saying, but Magic Skeptic, that's a terrible analogy, because that's not what's going on with Christianity. Christians aren't the members of a jury who have compelling evidence that points in the direction of God, and so they can't be called rational in the same way. But I would actually beg to differ. This might sound surprising coming from me, but just consider the following story. Imagine a little kid who was raised in an evangelical community. Let's imagine they were raised somewhere in the Bible Belt of the United States. Just think about this kid's life as they grow up into becoming a teenager and ultimately an adult. Think about the things that they have seen. Think about their experiences. Think about the evidence of their eyes and ears. This is a child who, from a very young age, will have had these beliefs reinforced by their elders, their parents, their peers, their community, over and over and over and over again. This person will have been told, God is real, God is real, God is real, miracles are possible, etc., etc. But it doesn't just stop there. It's not just a list of assertions. This is a child who attends an evangelical church, so they've probably witnessed people dropping to the floor and trembling as the quote-unquote Holy Spirit enters their body. They've probably witnessed people speaking tongues. And furthermore, they've probably witnessed miracles. Again, inverted commas. What kind of miracles? They might have witnessed a person who has been experiencing pain for a very long time, say a backache or something of that nature, and they will have witnessed that person experience a miraculous healing where their pain vanished during this ritual, where the evangelical and charismatic preacher banished their pain and banished the devil from their body, and the person felt a sense of joy and jubilation and threw their arms up into the air and started crying, fell to their knees and thanked Jesus Christ our Lord. This is a person who may very well have witnessed miraculous physical changes in people's bodies, where a short leg was lengthened so that it was of equal length to the other leg. And again, a person who then threw their hands up into the air and thanked Jesus as the charismatic preacher shouted and screamed the words of the Lord or the words of the Bible. These are the kinds of things that this child will have witnessed growing up throughout their entire life. Then they get older after all of this indoctrination has set in, and they start really praying and trying to dedicate themselves to Christ themselves, and then they feel a feeling of internal bliss, genuine feeling of internal bliss, which they interpret quite reasonably at this point as the Holy Spirit, or as the presence of the divine. And this sense of bliss causes them to volunteer for immersion baptism, where they're dunked into the water and they feel that sense of bliss again as they are baptized in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit in front of their entire congregation. Guys, the person I'm describing here is a description of millions, if not billions of people on the planet. And it's not obvious to me, forgive me for saying so, dear listener, I hope this won't be a big source of disagreement between us, but it's not obvious to me that irrational is the best word to describe that person's state of mind. A person having experienced that much indoctrination, that much manipulation, intentional or not, although in the case of miraculous healings, I can categorically tell you that manipulation is at play because these are magicians' tricks and tricks of psychology involving adrenaline and so forth. And these charismatic preachers know that well, and many of them have been proven to be charlatans who are rather cynically manipulating the belief and the faith of honest but ignorant people. The key point is, if a person has witnessed all of this, it's not clear to me that irrational is the best label to put on that person's mindset. I think they're a victim. I think that they have been indoctrinated. I think in some cases, as I've already described, they have been manipulated. I understand that all of this is utterly fallacious in the extreme. It all boils down to correlation rather than causation. It all boils down to fallacious reasoning. And it all boils down to taking on faith the words from your elders and your peers and so on. It's fallacious in the extreme. Fallacy of consensus. The fallacy of authority. Right? It's all there, plain to see. But a person who's not philosophically educated doesn't know all of that. They're simply ignorant. They're simply ignorant. They're wrong. They're ignorant. They're mistaken. But irrational? I'm not convinced that that's the best word, guys, and I hope you understand where I'm coming from here. Another word, ill-informed, might be better. Mistaken might be better. Victim might be better. But irrational, I just don't buy it. But jump into the comments below and let me know if you disagree. Maybe I've missed something. Maybe there's something that you need to draw my attention to, and then I might be more comfortable deploying that word. And so, again, surprising though it might be, I do think we need to give theists a little bit of a break here, and not just come to the conclusion that they're all irrational morons. I think there's a little bit more going on than that, and we need to, and I certainly need to pump the brakes a bit more when I'm deploying that word. And I know the irony of this is that next week, if and when I upload another most annoying religious people video, I'll be throwing out the word irrational again. And look, I'm human, I make mistakes, I'm irrational. So I will endeavor to be more careful about how I deploy this word. And yeah, anyway, with that acknowledged, let's move on to the next meme. Theist logic. Science can't prove the Big Bang or how life came into existence. Therefore, an invisible sky magician did it. If you don't believe me, then you're going to hell forever. I absolutely love this statue of Jesus. I don't know where this statue is. I don't know where that picture originally came from, but it's just glorious. I absolutely love it. If you know where that statue is, if you know where it can be found, dear listener, please jump into the comments below and let me know, because I would love to know. I would love to visit this statue in person. It's absolutely brilliant. But yeah, this meme is an interesting one, and I'm not so sure that I agree with all of it. So it says that science can't prove the Big Bang. Maybe there are theists out there who say that, but in my experience, most Christians are on board with the Big Bang and Big Bang cosmology. They'll just add an extra tenet, which is to say that God did it. Of course, it's just a bald-assed assertion, and there's no reason to believe that God did it. But I don't hear Christians denying the Big Bang. I mean, I suppose there's a small number. There are people who do, but the vast majority of Christians, it seems to me, accept Big Bang cosmology. The second part is definitely spot on. We can't explain how life came into existence. That's true. Science doesn't know how life came into existence. Abiogenesis is a mystery that scientists are working on. Maybe we'll get the answer someday. Maybe we won't. Maybe it will forever be a mystery. We might very well be disbarred from discovering the truth of how life began because it happened so long ago. And so, yeah, maybe we're stuck. But yes, Christians do like to get mileage out of this particular point. This is God of the Gaps 101, right? You identify some gap in our knowledge, i.e. the origin of life. We don't know where the first self-replicating organisms came from or how they came about. We have no idea. But yeah, as soon as you find that mystery, theists are going to insert God in that gap. You don't know where life came from, therefore God did it. Or as it puts it in the meme, a sky magician did it. And if you don't believe me, you're going to go to hell and burn forever. Oh man, the whole threat side of Christianity really makes me chuckle. Every single time you disagree, the more fundamentalist types will threaten you with hell, which, as I've pointed out numerous times in the channel, is the equivalent of threatening somebody with invisible arrows. Yeah, sorry, your threat doesn't work if I don't believe the threat is real. Sorry. But yeah, God of the Gaps, guys, that's what this meme is pointing out. And I have to say, much to the chagrin of theists and Christians who may be watching, you guys do engage in God of the Gaps a hell of a lot, I have to say. Wherever there's a mystery in our scientific understanding, you just love to put God in that gap, don't you? You just love it. So yeah, we don't know where life came from, and that's the difference between people like me, skeptics, and Christians. I'll honestly admit that I don't know where life comes from or how it came about. Christians won't do that. They'll say God did it. And when you ask them for their evidence, they'll point to the Bible. And then when you ask them for evidence for their Bible, they'll point to God. And then when you ask them for evidence for God, they'll point to the Bible. A vicious circle. I believe the Bible because the Bible says it's true. I believe the Bible because God exists. And I believe God exists because of the Bible. Well, best of luck with that, buddy. But I'm not interested. Let's move on to the next meme. If Christians actually bother to read the Bible, they probably wouldn't be Christians anymore. This is one of those memes I'm lukewarm about, because it's definitely true to say that some people became atheists by reading the Bible. That's absolutely the case, and you can just Google it. Just fact check me, dear listener. You will find the atheists out there who attribute their atheism to having read the Bible. Fine. But there are other people, I must say, who have read the Bible from front to back, from cover to cover, and it strengthened their faith. So this meme is one of those ones I'm going to disagree with. I mean, it's partially true, but yeah, I can't stand by this meme because there are far too many Christians who have read the Bible from cover to cover, and all it did was serve to strengthen their faith. And the same is true of other religions. Muslims who read the Quran cover to cover, you know, people believe or don't believe for their own reasons. Some people's faith is strengthened by their holy text. Other people's faith is weakened by their holy text. It depends on how it hits the individual, and that comes down to the subjectivity of psychology and so on. It probably comes down to a whole load of nuances that I can't even dream of in this instant. I can see how the Bible would cause someone to become an atheist. I mean, when you think about what's in the Bible, when you think about some of the statements in the Bible, some of the immorality that's on display, God wiping out entire civilizations and turning people into pillars of salt, and God recommending the stoning of homosexuals and bestowing women in a second-class position in relation to their male counterparts, all of that stuff makes for very eye-opening reading. And I suppose what I will say, to not, I don't know, maybe this is putting too fine a point on it, but I suppose I would be worried about the kind of person whose faith is strengthened by reading the Bible from cover to cover. Because I will say this, I don't think it's possible to read the Bible, and I haven't read it from cover to cover, but I have studied it extensively. I don't think it's possible to read it without coming to the conclusion that God is some kind of a divine psychopath. And if you still believe and still want to love that God, worship and venerate that God by the time you get to the end of that text, unless you've got some kind of a acrobatic scheme of reinterpretation that preserves God from the allegations that I have stated here. Barring that, if you just take it at its word, if you still believe in it by the end of reading it, I'm worried about you, brother or sister. I'm worried if you want to worship that. I think Richard Dawkins put it best when he said the following, and I quote, "The God of the Old Testament is arguably the most unpleasant character in all fiction, jealous and proud of it, a petty, unjust, unforgiving control freak, a vindictive, bloodthirsty ethnic cleanser, a misogynistic, homophobic, racist, infanticidal, genocidal, filicidal, pestilential, megalomaniacal, sadomasochistic, capriciously malevolent bully." Tell us what you really think, Richard Dawkins. But the thing is, I actually think that statement is quite accurate. So again, I will say that if somebody manages to read the Bible from cover to cover, given that description that Dawkins just gave us, and how accurate it is in my estimation, if you still want to worship that God at the end of the Bible, I'm definitely worried about you. So I can see how reading the Bible would turn people into an atheist, but again, I have to beg to differ with this meme, because there are so many Christians who have done exactly that, and all it did was either strengthen their faith or have no effect on their belief other than just interesting reading, and they continue to be a Christian nonetheless. But with that acknowledged, let's move on and take a look at one more meme. Prove that God doesn't exist. Okay, show me how it's done by proving Zeus and Apollo don't exist, and I'll use your method then. I love this. I absolutely love this. Not just because it features Hugh Laurie, who's an absolute legend, by the way. House MD, by the way. If you haven't seen that show, it is excellent. Now, granted, I'm only on the second season. I'm still watching it. But if you want some good, solid entertainment, House MD is fantastic. But that acknowledged, I digress. This meme is absolutely brilliant because this happens all the time, where Christians ask or invite atheists to disprove their God. In other words, they reverse the burden of proof. I think Ricky Gervais did the best job of summarizing the problem here when he used the following analogy. Ricky Gervais said that this is kind of like somebody walking up to you and saying, "I can fly. You can't prove I'm not able to." Well, great, but I don't have to prove that you're not able to fly. I'm not going to believe that you can fly until you demonstrate that you can do so. And if you're not going to demonstrate that, well, then I'm just not going to believe you can fly. Now, the person who alleged that they can fly can keep saying, "Oh, well, prove that I can't, prove that I can't." No, I don't give a shit. You're the one who told me that you can fly. I don't go around the world shouting out loud, "People can't fly, people can't fly, people can't fly." That's not what that is. There's no such thing as an people flightist, right? I don't go around thinking about how people can't fly. I just believe things when there's good evidence for them. And if you're not going to demonstrate that you can fly, I don't have to prove that you're unable to. I'm just not going to believe that you can. And so too it is the case with atheism. People often misunderstand atheism as atheists going around the world saying, "There are no gods, there are no gods, there are no gods." Now, there might very well be atheists who do that, who take on the positive claim that there are no gods. I'm not one of them, dear listener. I don't make the claim there are no gods. Similar to the analogy that Ricky Gervais erected, I'm the person who's just stood here and the Christian comes up and says, "God exists, God exists, God exists. You can't prove that he doesn't exist." And I'm sitting here going, "Well, I don't believe that your God exists because you haven't demonstrated it. Why would I bother believing that? That makes no sense. Please provide evidence." "Well, you can't prove that he's not real." Well, yeah, sure, I can't prove that your unfalsifiable claim isn't true, just like I can't prove that that guy over there can't fly. But until he demonstrates that he can fly, and until you demonstrate that your God exists, I'm pretty damn comfortable, and justified, I would argue, sitting here not believing either of your claims. So these reversals of the burden of proof are just hogwash. And what this meme is drawing attention to is that Christians are unknowingly engaging in the kind of mistake that they're accusing atheists of. So Christians say that they're going to continue believing in their God until atheists prove them wrong. But couldn't the atheist just point out that the Christian is doing the same thing in relation to every other God that's on offer? When did you prove that Zeus doesn't exist, dear Christian? When did you prove that Apollo doesn't exist? When did you prove that Waheguru of the religion of Sikhism doesn't exist? When were you going to demonstrate that all of those gods don't exist? And when are you going to provide independent evidence for your own God? You see, you cannot do this. This is why reversals of the burden of proof are so ridiculous. Clearly, the most commonsensical, the most rational thing to do is to sit there and not believe things until those who claim that they're true provide satisfactory evidence to demonstrate the truth of the thing that they're claiming. We shouldn't have to go around disproving things. And that's what Christians expect atheists to do very often. They expect us to disprove their God, and until such time that somebody disproves their God, they believe that they're justified in continuing to believe it. Well, if that's the case, the believer in Zeus is justified in believing in Zeus until Christians prove them wrong. If that's the case, the believer in Apollo is justified in believing in Apollo until Christians prove them wrong, and so on and so forth ad infinitum. You can see, guys, that this leads to absurdity. Clearly, the atheist is the one who's in the most rational position, sitting there saying, well, listen, guys, I don't believe that any of your gods are real until you provide evidence for it. And until then, just leave me alone. And stop trying to teach it to my kids in school. And stop trying to introduce laws that make my life more difficult because you want your religion to be enshrined in law. And stop making the lives of LGBTQ plus people more difficult while you're at it. And all the rest of it. I mean, goodness gracious me. Just stop it. Just stop it. And on that note, dear listener, I'm going to leave it there. Did you enjoy this second round of memes? These atheistic memes? Were you surprised about the ones that I disagreed with and actually had some choice words for? If so, jump into the comments below and let me know your thoughts. How would you have responded to these memes? Do you agree with my responses? I would love to hear, particularly if you disagreed with any of my responses. And again, if you'd like to share any of your thoughts with me, please do jump into the comments below and let me know. Other than that, if you like this video, make sure you drop a like on it. It costs you nothing and it helps out the channel enormously. But if you'd like to take your support of the channel even further, jump into the description box below. When you get there, you'll find the link to my Patreon page. Click that, and when you get there, you can sign up for as little as £3 per month, and for that, you will gain access to a plethora of perks, bonuses, and extras, depending on which tier you choose. With all that said and out of the way, thank you very much for watching this video, and I hope to see you in the next one. All the best. Bye-bye.